What's up, everyone? Grayson the Dean 221 Nichols here on the Elite Rounders YouTube channel, as always. And today is an exciting day. We've got the part two of the duel coming up next week between Hellmuth and Negreanu. But before we check that out, wanted to go over some of the pivotal inflection hands from the first battle last month, just to kind of get us prepped before we hop into the big one next week. So, on that note, the first hand that I wanted to talk about is one that probably a lot of people noticed. This was Hellmuth's pocket nines against Negreanu's 4-6 suited. And so the action that played out here, Hellmuth limps in. The blinds were 250, 500. Limps in for 250. Negreanu raises it up out of position with 6-4 suited. I think it's a game flow thing. I imagine a lot of the time checking there makes the most sense. But, again, Hellmuth's limping every button, so he's going to have to ISO raise a fair amount of hands as well. And Hellmuth re-raises really small. He makes it like 3,700. So it's like a clickback, right? Like a 2.2x almost on Daniel's raise. Just the kind of sizing that's never going to elicit folds. No matter what Daniel has, he's basically priced in to make the call here. The play doesn't make a ton of sense. Again, a lot of what Hellmuth does doesn't make a ton of sense, but hey, that's white magic, baby, and that's what gets it done. That's what got him the victory last time, apparently. So that's, for us to come here and analyze the hands afterward, right? So Hellmuth raises to 3,700, and Daniel, being priced in, goes ahead and calls the extra 2,200. We get an insane flop, a 3-4-4. Daniel flops the world with his trip fours, and Hellmuth has a strong overpair. Daniel goes ahead and checks, which seems standard, and Hellmuth bets 4,000. A C bet of just over half pot, also seeming somewhat standard. This is where I think Daniel could have gone a different way. Daniel ended up slow playing and calling. To me, I think this is a reasonable spot to consider just going ahead and putting Hellmuth in. He doesn't have many more chips. He only had about 12,000 chips left after that play. And it strikes me as a spot where, Phil took such an unorthodox preflop line that looks so damn strong for him. He's not limp raising ever. So this to me screams him having an overpair a lot of the time. So I think it's a good spot for Daniel just to go ahead, honestly, and probably check shove, putting Hellmuth in for his last 12,000, since again, there's already about 12,000 in the middle of the pot. It wouldn't be an unusual play stack to pot ratio wise. And I think Daniel could look like he has something like a draw. He could have ace-5 with the ace of hearts. He could have jack-10 of hearts, king-jack of hearts, a litany of draws in this spot. And Hellmuth would have to call off with his overpairs. I think the only hands Phil would consider folding there would be if he was bluffing pre, which he doesn't do, so that's not something you have to worry about. And maybe ace-king, ace-queen without a heart where he was just c-betting. But honestly, even if Hellmuth had ace-king with the ace of hearts, I think he'd probably stack off in this spot as well. So I think Daniel missed an opportunity to finish the job right here, but he decided to call. Turn was the 8 of hearts, and they went check, check, and then the river was a 5, and Daniel bets out 5,000 for a small value bet, which Phil calls. At that point, I kind of dig Daniel's value bet because I think, Phil unlikely has something like 9s through aces here, especially with a heart, because he probably would have just gotten in it on the turn. So I think Daniel thinks there's a good chance that Phil just has ace high, or maybe like black 9s, black 10s, something similar to what he had. And 5,000 in this spot is huge because it gets Phil down to just 7K, 14 big blinds or so, which would really put him in a tough spot in the heads-up battle, even though Hellmuth was able to make a miraculous comeback, which was incredibly impressive. So I think Daniel missed a spot to just kind of go for the throat and end it on the flop. And I think he did a reasonable value bet on the river. To which afterward, Hellmuth stood up and started ranting and raving as always, and he said, a bunch of expletives. Definitely, again, go back and check it out. It's always a hoot to watch his reactions. So I thought this hand was really interesting. The next one I wanted to talk about with you guys was one that I also think Phil played really goofy, So, again, when you don't raise a lot in certain spots, I think you make it difficult for opponents to consider that you're ever bluffing, and it's not going to be as easy to get value. Something I tell my students often, that if you are considering 3-betting or going for a big value bet in a certain, or a value line in certain spots, I think it's important that you should have some bluffs in these situations. Otherwise, if it looks like you have no bluffs and you only have value, people just aren't going to pay you off very often, right? And so, Hellmuth again takes a strong line preflop. Daniel raises with the king 9 suited on the button, standard. Hellmuth 3-bets with the jacks, also standard. He c-bets this flop. Again, I think it was a good c-bet. But then it gets a little weird. He goes ahead and barrels on the turn, which is an offsuit 3, which is okay because there's a lot of draws out there he could be charging Daniel for. But let's talk about blockers for a second. You know, all of the draws that Daniel could have on this board look like things like ace queen, ace jack, queen jack, right? Hearts, perhaps. And look at Hellmuth's hand. He has the jack of hearts. That's a significant blocker in this hand that really eliminates a lot of the draws Daniel might have. So now at this point, we can't really assume that Phil's getting value from draws, but more that he's targeting a 10. And if you really want to target a 10, I don't think you're going to be able to get 3 streets of value against second pair, especially against a really sharp opponent like Daniel, right? So I'm not sure Phil betting 3 streets makes a lot of sense in this hand. And he bets the turn, and sure enough, as you see here, he fires the river as well. Just a 25% bet. You know, you could say this is a blocker bet that would be sized up to get value from a 10, but again, I don't think Daniel's going to pay him off at this juncture. I think Phil, if he actually thought Daniel was on a draw, which again is difficult when he's blocking the jack of hearts, would probably be better suited to check here and give Daniel a chance to bluff his missed draws, like ace queen, queen jack, maybe like, you know, 8-9 of hearts type stuff. And then give Daniel a chance to bluff, and then Phil could call. But, of course, Phil does not do that. He goes ahead and bets, Daniel calls, and pretty big pot for Daniel. And again, Phil steams away, complaining that his jacks lost to king 9 suited, discussing nothing about him betting 3 streets with the jacks on a king high board. Blockers probably aren't really something that he's too concerned with either. So the last hand I wanted to go over with you guys was another one where, again, Mr. White Magic just plays it completely like passively and just leaves a lot of value on the table. So Daniel opens the button, raises to 1600 with 10-9 offsuit, which seems totally standard. And Phil just calls with the king-queen off. I think this is fine calling with this hand, but I also think you should mix in some 3-bets heads up in this spot. I think Daniel will call with a lot of worse hands, and hell, even a lot of dominated hands like king jack, queen 10, you know, king 10, king 9 suited, etc. So I think he could have definitely 3-bet here, but, you know, he's playing small ball. I get it. Flop comes out really strong for Phil. He's got the second nut flush draw, 2 overs, and it's not bad for Daniel. You know, with the 10 of diamonds, it's often good heads up here. So Phil checks. Daniel bets really small here, like 1/5 of the pot. I think it's fine going this small. I don't mind it. Makes some amount of sense. I think he could go a little bigger, but no reason to go too big in this spot. Phil calls, and the turn comes the 8 of diamonds. They both hit their flush. So money card for both of them. Phil checks. Daniel also checks. River comes out the queen of diamonds now. So now Phil again has the second nuts, but Daniel has improved to the third nuts. Only the ace of diamonds, the king of diamonds beat him. Phil checks again. So he just checks his second nuts, you know, in this spot. And Daniel c-bets, excuse me, not c-bets, he bets for value here, as of course he should with the third nut flush, and Phil just calls. He gets almost no value in this spot where he has the second nut flush against the third nut flush. He couldn't have played it more passively, and he got no value in a spot that should be a total setup if they were playing more aggressive. So yes, Phil was able to win this match, but going back and looking at the key hands, he really didn't play them too well. So I think that luck was really on the side of Mr. White Magic, and I'm really excited to see what happens in the second bout next week. Definitely tune in next Wednesday for the battle on Poker Go, and then we'll be doing our recap video on Thursday on the Elite Rounders YouTube channel as always. Best of luck this weekend, everyone. See you guys soon. Take it easy, and can't wait to watch this rematch.